All right. Okay. So let's dive into Serger Stitches, the reason why we are all really here today. And so before we get into the stitches, I thought it would be really helpful to understand a little bit about the history of sergers. Like, I always thought that there's only one machine, and that's the sewing machine. And then I found out there's many other types of machines that you should have. And so I want you just to give us a little bit of backstory, a little bit of history of what you know and what you'd like to share with us about the Serger.
Sure. So I'm gonna ask you a question first. I love trivia. So when do you think the first Serger came about? Just
Um,
yes.
so I'm gonna say maybe in like the 1930s, 19. And the reason why I'm saying that is because I like vintage patterns. And so I look at like, okay, what's the earliest vintage pattern that I can find or that I see? So I
Not
sort
gonna
of
say
kind
an
of basing that on,
emancipation.
yeah. So 1930s, I'm guessing.
Okay. Okay. So we have 1930s. I see Carmen up here talking about emancipation. Any other guesses? Any other guesses? Even in the comments, which I yeah, you're wrong, but it's all right. I'll tell you.
Any other guesses?
Any other ones before we 1950s? Okay. Probably Carmen's probably the closest, actually. No, not Child. You gonna
Look,
stop
she's
just
talking about she's picking historic numbers.
right?
Right. Look,
Late 1800s. Okay. So the
look.
answer is the actual patent date for the serger was 1889
Oh wow. Okay.
by the Merrow Company, which was started as like a knitting mill. So they needed for their knit garments, they wanted to put them together. So they created the serger. The company that actually makes them, the Merrow Company, is still around today. They still make
Merrill, like Merrill, like that
no
Merrill.
Merrow, Merrow.
Oh, marrow, like
Mm-hmm.
bone marrow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, marrow.
But
Okay.
with the E at the front. But yeah, so they still around today. They still make industrial sergers and stuff like that. So it does not look like the sergers we know today. But that started in 1889. The first domestic serger that you had in the household, so kind of to go along with a pattern, that was in 1965. That
1960.
is the first one. So and that was made by Juki. And if you actually go back and look in the back in the days, like Juki Baby Lock, they were basically the start of the serger industry for the home use. And until even like with Bernina, Juki still made their sergers up until this L8 series. So the L890, the L860 is the first sergers that they designed and constructed in house. So
Wow.
Juki is still a large person making a lot of even our domestic sergers today. Um, but I love history of sewing. But those are like surgery is something that we think synonymous with a lot of our clothing today. You are wondering like back then, like in the 18s and stuff like that, what did they use them on? So they use them on a lot of times like your cotton stockings that you were making and stuff like that. When you got into the Industrial Revolution, a lot of your lingerie dresses around the 19 like Edwardian era, so like 1908, 1909, 19 teens. Actually, so here's a picture. So here is an example of some of those early serger stitches. Okay, to show you what garment it is on, this is the dress
Oh wow.
with
Okay.
those serger stitches or on. So a lot of like your mass market. So these are some of the first garments that you were seeing in your department stores and stuff like that. Um, when I was first thought of a child, you were thought of in 1989, not 1889, 100 years before. But yeah, so 1889. But and if you look at it and thinking of in relation to just even sewing machine history, because the first sewing machine, we think of like 1840s or so with the Howe machine. That is the first like mass commercial machine. Howe was the one who had the patents. There was some drama there. Like he literally sold his patents for a while. Finally got his patents back. Like he had to get them out of hock. He pawned them to help get his family back to the US because he was in the UK. And then you start seeing all these different companies kind of copying his patents. He started suing the pants off of everybody. And that's when you start seeing Howe versus Singer. And they were kind of battling and stuff like that. But that's not even the first sewing machine. First sewing machine was in the 1780s, 1790s.
Wow.
help make uniforms for the French, like for the French officers and stuff like that. But they had a tailor's guild there who was up in arms at the idea that this could be taking jobs, and they basically went to the shop where these machines were at, and they chopped them up and burned down the whole factory.
Wow. That's crazy.
Which is pretty. It's a pretty interesting tidbit on history. But even as we think of like lace and stuff like that, most of the time lace was handmade, and then they started having machines to do that, like with bobbinet lace and a lot of like your tools and stuff in like 1808. That's the first patent for that. So just kind of in the line of succession with the Industrial Revolution, and as we get better with things, we start seeing these machines to help in our processes.
Yeah, well, one of the things that you made me think about when you said like, "Hey, they were first created to make stockings," and I'm you're talking about like women's stockings, right? Is
Yeah,
that what you're talking about? Like women. So when I thought about that, it made me think like, back in the day when you used to buy stockings and you turn them inside out, because as you know, women,
vaccine.
we used to put right. We used to put those stockings like on our black women. We would put them on our head before we if you didn't have stocking cap, you would put that stocking on your head to kind of protect your hairstyle. And if you fell asleep with that little surged in on your anywhere on your head, you were going to have like a little indentation somewhere on your head. And it just made me think about, I didn't know what that was. I didn't know that that came from a serger, but it took me back. Like, okay, that came from, a serger. I think the other thing, again, when I'm thinking about serger is the first place that I, again, recognize a serger seam, again, now knowing, just looking back, is in the seams of the underwear. Like
Oh yeah,
where underwear are, and I guess men's underwear too, but just thinking about how women's underwear are made, there are certain locations where you're going to see those seams. And looking back at my underwear when I was like a kid versus now, that seam has become so almost, well, now they have seamless underwear. But
right.
back then, that little edge used to be pretty thick back, when I was a kid. That little, connection used to be pretty thick, and now it is almost disappeared. And that goes to the evolution of the different types of sergers stitches that we have that can make a difference between whether that's a thick, a lump, or is it pretty flat in terms of how those, stitches come together. So just a couple of things that made me think about in terms of the types of stitches and how they can lay differently on a garment. Um,
Absolutely.
so another question, so that was really helpful. And of course, I'm taking notes because I like to remember these things, and I want to type it up and, maybe put it into a little blog post again, and give credit, of course, to Julian. So one of the things that I always think about, when it comes to, serging is what is the difference between an overlocker and a serger? Or is there even a difference? Like when I first started sewing, I was like, I heard overlocker, I heard serger. And when I thought, oh, I need this machine, give me both of them. Give me an overlocker or give me a serger. Tell us about, are these things different? Are they the same? What is it? What is the difference? And what is an overlocker? Why would somebody call it that if you're familiar with that history behind that name?
So there is no difference. They are the same thing. And basically, every place else beyond America is called an overlocker. That's the type of stitch that you're doing. You're doing an overlock stitch. So that's what
Okay.
it's about. Because it is those threads that are looping around that is locking in everything in place. Overlocker. Serger, I don't know where the term serger came from or where we got surge, like a surged edge from, but it's usually the process of surging or closing that edge.
Mhm.
And we just like literally the only place that you hear of the term serger is America. Every place else is overlocker.
Now I'm gonna throw this question out there to you. Have overlocker slash sergers always had like a knife on it that cut off the piece?
Mm-hmm.
They've all, like,
So
historically, from have they've had, like, that's been a part of the process.
yes, so the reason that you have that knife there, and this is what kind of differentiated from a um cover stitch. So that knife there is cutting off that edge and is helping the threads wrap around that fresh, clean edge, giving it that's what's going to keep everything together. So without that, basically, it could either the threads would not wrap around that edge and it will create more bulk. So cutting off that edge is kind of eliminating some of the bulk that you can find in some of your seams, unless you want like a rolled hem or something like that. But so that's why it's going around and cutting that edge. But you get, of course, get to decide how much you want to cut off when you are making your seams.
When you make, okay, good, good. And then so then you just brought up another term that I was
Mm-hmm.
also very confused about, which is the cover stitch. So again,
Yeah.
I'm going into the place, I'm calling, I'm like, give me one overlocker, one serger, and one cover stitch machine. Tell me about like what's the difference between, obviously we know now overlocker and serger are the same, but the cover stitch, like, are they this, is it the same? What's the difference? You know, tell us a little bit about that part.
Okay, so so if you're looking at the anatomy of a serger or overlocker, it is usually you have your needles. You could have one or two needles, and you have an upper looper and a lower looper that is creating like a kind of a knit effect, and then you have two lines of stitching within that. The first line of stitching is at the base, kind of anchoring everything in place of those loops. Then you have one kind of in the middle before you get to the edge of the fabric that is kind of holding those loops in place. That's usually how your seams are going with a an overlock stitch. Now, with a cover stitch, what is happening is that you have three needles, up to three needles. Sometimes you can have two, sometimes you can have one, and you have one looper. Okay, that looper is working with everything to kind of knit those needles going through to help create an edge. So the front can look like this,
Okay.
and the back can look like that.
Ah.
So what it is, this is basically used for a lot of your finishing of knit garments. Because another thing that's great about this is that it looks like a regular straight stitch from the front, but it does still allow for stretch, and nothing is going to pop. Nothing is getting stretched out of place. Um, but again, a lot of times you're using your of the machines. So you have your lock stitch regular sewing machine, you have your serger overlocker, then you have your cover stitch. A cover stitch, you're probably going to use the least.
The least. Okay. So cover stitch is really when you need to add, when you need to add a top stitch but also finish the garment. Would that be a fair statement?
So
Okay.
top stitch finish the garment. You can also use it for some decorative. You can now. You can sew with it. You can do some sewing with your cover stitch. It's going to be a little bit more difficult. Some people might use it for um some like just for its chain stitch feature. So if you have one needle and your actual looper or your hook, that's going to create a chain stitch. Your chain stitch is basically the type of stitch that if you didn't have a bobbin thread and a needle thread in your lock stitch machine. So it
Okay.
basically brings down the thread and kind of does a crochet. And that's what it looks like on the back. And if you pull it, it all can come out. So yeah,
Oh,
but you can do all different types of stitches. So you can do certain things on the front or the back. You can make designs
mhm.
with your cover stitch if you have a cover stitch. But again, you don't need one if that's not something that you go to often.
And so what you just showed us, is that the one with the three needles?
So the one I just showed you,
That stitches
I
you
did
just
this
showed
with two
us
needles. This is two needles.
with two
So
needles. Okay.
yep. So it has like just two lines of thread. And to show you, so I'm this is my Burnett B42, and it's able to do a
Okay.
three, a two, or a one needle cover stitch.
Is it correct to think that the number of needles will be synonymous with the number of stitches that you see on the front or top of the garment? Is that a correct
Correct.
statement?
Yes.
Okay.
And it like basically kind of because even like it does not even matter the width. So like I can put a needle in my one position and my two position and get a wide cover stitch. I could do one in all three to get three lines. I could do the two left ones or something like that. So yes, that it is synonymous of where and what your cover stitch will look like. The number of
And the
needles
back will always look the same or similar to what you
similar.
showed us.
Yes, the back will always have some type of level of this. If it is a chain stitch, it's just going to basically look like single crochet down the back of it. If you just have the looper and one needle, but yeah, it's going to
Okay.
always look similar to this.
Okay. So Tydri asked, is the B42 a good starter for the cover stitch?
For a cover stitch, and looking at the pricing, it is. These normally run around $500. It is a basic machine. Sometimes it can have a little user error as you're getting used to it, because the way that you use it is not like you would use a sewing machine or even a serger. Like serger, a lot of times we serge something, we are serging off the fabric. With a cover stitch, you are never going to try to get out of that fabric. That's going to cause a mess in your machine that can cause it to jam. So what you are also doing is, most of the time you're not pulling threads out of your machine. To lock stitches with a cover stitch, you are having to kind of raise your presser foot, pull threads towards you so that you can cut the needle threads, and then pull the fabric and stuff away from you to lock everything in place.
Oh,
So
so that's
there's a different like method in which you are using that machine that takes a little bit of getting used to.
So that's a great question. And I think that, getting into the cover stitch machine, especially for somebody who is making garments, it will
Mm-hmm.
add that finishing touch, is what I read in the book. It's like a great way to have a finishing touch to a garment that is quicker. And we saw this in a recent live that we had. It was myself, Carmen, and Aisha, and I was using fusing tape, and I think Carmen was using fusing. No, Carmen was doing a stitch, and
Mm-hmm.
Aisha had a cover stitch, and she was like done instantly. And Carmen and I were still kind of working through our own individual methods of finishing the edge of this garment.
Yes.
And her was so if you have a business where you are making garments and you need that finishing touch, and it's going to save a lot of time. And Aisha's saying it saved a ton of time. And you could even see on that live, it took us probably a good 20 minutes after Aisha finished hers to wrap up our process of finishing, which is not a good or a bad, but if you are sewing multiple garments, it's definitely going to save you time. So, right, Terrence said we love saving time. So the cover stitch machine is something you might want to invest in for your business if you are doing something where you want to have that nice, clean finish garment. So I'm going to ask you one other question about the cover stitch machine, which
Mm-hmm.
is, I am aware that there are machines that combine both the serger and the cover stitch machine. And
Correct.
if you could talk a little bit about how that's different from how it's different or how it's the same as what you showed us with that, that finishing garment where it had that kind of serger look on one side and then the top stitch look on the other side. If you could talk a little bit about if somebody had neither a cover stitch or a serger, like how would they choose? Do I just want to get a cover stitch? Do I just want to get a serger? Or do I want to get a combo machine? Like, what would be the best for that person, and what's the differences?
So it depends on what they would use it for. A lot of times, the way that you would say it, you can do more construction with a serger. Like if you were thinking about getting another machine on top of a sewing machine, a serger is always good to have. A cover stitch is a luxury. So let's say that you have a combo machine, a serger cover stitch. What you are basically, the difference between the two, you are kind of eliminating the knife. So you're either probably pushing the knife down or you are moving the knife. You're putting a different plate over to kind of get rid of that space where the knife usually lives. Um, and there are some other features that you have to do so that you are turning off certain loopers, so that you are only using like that cover stitch looper that is available in these machines. um, some people literally have combo machines and never like change it from one to the or the other. um, I've had my cover stitch. This is probably my first time pulling it out in about a year and a half, because we about to make draws, and I will say like, oh, that'd be cute to use my cover stitch for that. It just adds a little something. If I especially we're combining elastic with like your regular cotton lycra or something like that, that's going to create a nice clean edge on the back. But let's say you didn't have any of this, you can do the same with a double needle. You can do the same with a zigzag stitch. There are other ways to do it if you do not have these machines yet. And even using your serger, there are ways that you can combine stitches and stuff like that if you want to get a more finished kind of cover stitch look.
So you brought up a really good, again, another question that I didn't have, but you brought up a really good tidbit of information. If you don't have a cover stitch, let's say you're like, I don't have any other machine other than my sewing machine. And based on what you just said, the next best option you're going to get the most use out of is probably the serger. So you now make the serger, but you want to have these finishing looks to your garment.
Mm-hmm.
Zigzag stitch is one of the ways that you can kind of achieve maybe that finishing look without a cover stitch. Obviously, it's going to be a separate step. what was the other ways that you said, like you said zigzag stitch, and then you said a couple other things, and I
So
missed.
a double needle.
Oh,
So
double.
using a
Oh,
double needle
yes.
with your machine. So that's going to give you the look of this on the front, okay, with some like zigzagging in the back. You can use certain quilting stitches depending on the level of the machine that you have. If it has like the zigzag capabilities, understand that a lot of these, like, we did not see the genesis of these type of machines for home use until knits and polyesters and kind of like those synthetic fibers really came into place. So it just all depends. Understand that even with the knit, like, so I have many patterns and stuff like that. You technically, I would not say do it all the time. There are certain techniques that you can do this on a straight stitch machine and still be able to get stretch in your fabric from just using a regular lock stitch. So there are ways to do it. But the easiest and going to be the most kind of where a lot of our education and stuff is going is if you have a lock stitch machine with a zigzag capability, and if you have a serger, because it helps with finishing those edges, it gives you a nice clean finished look. Yeah, trying to give an example of that.
Yeah, no, no, go. You give the example, and I'm gonna just talk a little bit about. So again, just to recap what Julian just told us, he said, "Hey, if you don't have the cover stitch, there are some other alternative options: zigzag stitch, the double needle or twin needle. Is that correct? Can I call it twin needle? Okay,
Yes,
twin
twin needle.
needle, and then some quilting stitches that you can use as well
Mm-hmm.
to
So,
give
and
that
that's like decorative, and but again,
decorative. Okay,
it's not something that you have to do. It's all up to you. I mean, remember, once you start making your garments, you're the designer. You get to make the design choices, even if you're working off of somebody else's pattern. You are the one making it. It is now in your hands. Do what you decide that you want to do. So now, the great thing about like a serger is just going to give you nice clean edges, especially since it is cutting off that excess. It gives you a nice, and I have a light right above me, so, but it gives you a nice clean edge.
hmm I love it.
You can see that fabric wrapping around, and if I can, let me see if I can show the edge, literally at the edge of it, right there, like all those threads are converging and kind of looping together and making some crosses there.
That is that look, I love that's my favorite part about it. It's so clean on the inside. You know, you meet another sewist and you know all as sewists, the first thing you want to do is look at the inside of something. When I'm in the store now, I start looking at
Oh
how
yeah.
things are constructed. I've never looked at things and I'm like, oh, I can make that. Oh, I can make that. So yeah, that is
And
something.
then so sassy style asks, "Do I like the overcasting stitch?" I don't use it that often because I have a serger.
Can you
But
talk about what that is? The overcasting stitch?
so essentially,
What
what is
machine is
happening?
that on? What machine is
That
that?
would be on your regular sewing machine.
Okay.
And what that's basically doing, it is mimicking the loops that go around like a serger stitch by finishing edges. So you normally do that towards the edge of your fabric. The other way that you could also do it is by using a zigzag, but that zigzag, like, so you kind of go up, and in that moment where you're furthest away from like your regular seam line, you're kind of almost at the edge of your fabric and then going back this way, kind of where you're able to encase the edges of your fabric to kind of make sure there's no fraying there. It's
Okay.
just like as a finishing stitch. Because I have a serger, I don't use those stitches often, but they are a good alternative if you do not have a serger and want to finish your edges.
Okay, no, that's a great question. I wrote that down. There's another alternative, another option. So you made me think about another question, which is I have historically always thought that sergers are used to finish the insides of a garment. And then I got this book and I saw there were more pictures of serger stitches being used on the outside of the garment than on the inside of the garment. And so that just blew my mind because I never thought about using a serger stitch on the outside of any garment. And so if you could talk a little bit about that, clearly the knife part is not involved in this. Um,
Depends.
oh, okay. Well, look, let me let
Depends.
you take over because you are the expert.
So yes, oh, excuse me. You can use any stitch can be decorative depending on how you want to use it. So you can play with the stitch width, you can play with the stitch length to get different looks in your finishing. And then depending on your machine, you might have something called differential feed. Differential feed is basically how the fabric is feeding into the machine. So normally on a serger, there are two sets of feed dogs. So you have a feed dog in the front and a feed dog in the back that are working like this. with certain fabrics and stuff like that, one feed doll might be working faster than the other feed doll. That can make the fabric either stretch out or kind of wrinkle up, and then you'll get a wavy effect. So depending on what you're using, such as you can do some rolled hems, you can do larger rolled hems, you can basically do satin stitches and stuff like that. There's so many different ways that you can then use your serger for all different types of decorative stitches. Actually, one amazing thing, let's say that you had a piece of interfacing or a piece like water stabilizer, you can actually make something called serger lace, where
Ooh.
basically you are creating, like, you're doing your first serge edge on a piece of stabilizer that you'll then wash away. But then past that, you're kind of shifting over less than about maybe around a quarter of an inch or something like that, and you are just serging on the rest of the thread, creating lace, which is your serger thread, because it does not need. If you think about it, when you're using your serger, it creates a chain. So let me.
Okay.
So it creates a change where you can actually still see that it still made the stitch. Now, this is not something that you would normally see on a sewing machine. It goes ahead and still makes the stitch. It still kind of knits everything together. So you're kind of going around this, and you are literally continuing to sew using this and creating chains around your serger stitches. So you
So
can make some serger.
why would you do something like that? Like what would I be making or what would I be doing that would make me want to use that technique, or what would I need that for? Like, is that like a lingerie type of garment, or
No, it would be literally like if you wanted to make a shawl or something like that, or a cow, and you are just wanting to utilize your machine in a different way. Understand, these are not like, once you get to some of these decorative things, these are not utilitarian. So it's just, this will be fun to use. And most people only, you got to realize, so America, in terms of sewing, we are quilters. We are not garment sewists like other countries
Mhm.
around the world. So that means that the way that um, we don't buy sergers at the same rate that other people do. And so, in showing different ways that you can use your serger for decorative projects, that was something that was built for us to figure out, how else can I use this machine? Because a lot of people like, I only quilt, I don't need a serger. But you can quilt on your serger. So
I
you can put
saw
a
that.
binding. You can do a lot of different things on your serger.
I saw that and I was like, oh, this is a whole new level. That's the next level. So I just wanted to show people an idea, again, new to me, of how people use the serger as a I'm gonna call it a top stitch. I don't know if there's a better
Yeah,
word, but I would have never thought that this is a stitch that you would use, but this is literally a serger stitch that is on the outside of a garment. I've never done a stitch on the outside of the garment. That's just one of many different types of stitches that you can, I guess you would call it a decorative stitch that you would put on
yeah.
the outside of a garment.
No, so
Um,
that's not a decorative stitch.
oh, it's
That
not.
right
Oh, okay.
there, that was actually a construction stitch. So that is
Okay.
called a flat lock stitch.
Flat
Okay.
lock.
So
Okay. So
let's
you're
say,
saying that that is actually putting two pieces of the garment together,
correct.
holding it together, but
Yeah.
also done in a way that is
Yeah.
nice and neat.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So yeah,
Flat stick.
the Lululemon stitch. Yes. So basically, like, if you wanted, like, we all get those leggings, you get those different athletic garments and stuff like that, and it looks like it has the back of your cover stitch on the front, like
Yes.
it's going down the side. So that's what a flat lock stitch basically does. It mimics this. You could also, if you wanted to, and what's great about it is, like, literally you're butting two pieces of fabric together. Now, on a serger, what you're doing is that you're sewing it flat and then opening the garment up to get that flat look. But it basically does the same. So one of the great things now, I am partial, just to let everybody know in the audience, y'all know I'm partial to the machine that LaShawn has. Okay. Reason is, I actually launched that machine. That is the ad that you will find in any store that
Yes.
sells the Bernina L860. I was the first person in a house in the world that had that machine. Okay.
Can we put that down in Black History, please? I'm just saying, next Black History Month, I'm gonna quote that.
Oh Jesus.
Please, everybody.
But anywho's, but yeah, so that is I understand this machine. One of the great things about this machine and the LH60 brand is literally that it has, like, looking at my machine right now, I have 30 different stitches I can use on my serger. There are so many different ways that you can use. Now, no, these are fancier machines, but even on a regular serger, like a regular, like your brother
Right.
1034D or anything like that, there are multiple stitches that you can use by changing the different settings on your machine. So it is possible. Like, and most of the time, if you're looking at a serger, what you will notice is that it says 4 thread, but it usually says like a 4/3/2 thread machine, meaning that there are certain 4 thread stitches, certain 3 thread stitches, certain 2 thread stitches that you can do.
Absolutely.
I
So
did. That's my machine.
that
It's
is
my baby.
look.
I hold it dearly.
But you brought up a really good point, which is, yes, this is that machine, but I think it's important for people to know that the multiple stitches is not exclusive to Bernina's sewing machine. You have to look at the type of serger that you have. And I know that many people have the brother machine, the 1034D or DX, or the
Yes,
1634 D or DX. And those machines also have, I
a lot
think
of different
they
features. Yeah.
have, right, different stitches. I'm trying to think of what mine was. I think it was 3 stitch. I think the 1634 has 3 stitches, 3 needle, three,
Yes. So
that's 3 needle.
if it has 3 needles,
I think it's 3 needle. Does that
no,
sound right? Or
it would have 2 threads. So it could
two
have
threads? Okay.
or two, so it could either be a 3 thread, because you don't usually look at sergers by the number of needles.
Okay.
Now, if it did have 3 needles, that means that there might have been a safety stitch in there, giving
Okay.
you more combo vibes. That means there were probably another looper so that you can do like a chain stitch alongside the serger edge.
Okay. I'm
So
gonna
that's
look and see
a
whether it
little
was
different.
3 needles or two. I can't remember now, but I feel like it was three. But to your
Okay.
point, if anybody has the 1634, they drop in the chat what it was. But my point is that every serger will have like different stitches that you could do. And so you have, you pull out your manual and you can see that what can you do? So someone asked earlier, what was this book? And this book is the big book of serging. It
Yeah.
is a book that's by Bernina, but I'm going to tell you that a lot of the information that is in this book pertains to other, just the serger in general. And so it's just really a lot of education about the serger in general. I found it to be very helpful, and it let me know, like, hey, you spending all this money on a serger and you're using it for one thing, and it really has so many other uses of what you can do with this. I mean, it's 200 pages of things that you need to know about your serger. That is not necessarily, the how might be necessarily to Bernina, but the what is not necessarily specific to Bernina. And so I
Now,
just found it really helpful.
those books, I love those books, but let's say they might be out your budget. Okay. So one book that you can go look at, like at half price books, this is the complete Serger handbook. Okay. This is a little bit older, from like the 90s, but it gives you a good primer on all the different like tension dials, helping you identify all your different serger parts, how to clean it, looking at different threads, how you can use decorative threads. But then it, of course, goes through all the different stitches and how the different ways that your stitches can look. So this is one of them.
What is
Uh,
that one called again,
the
Julian?
the Complete Serger Handbook by Chris James.
Okay. Handbook.
It will be in
Chris.
my Amazon store later, Carmen.
Okay, yes, I was going to say, please put in your Amazon store, Chris James.
So if you are then looking for, if you really want to see a blast from the past, I got this in a set of different things like that. But this really gives you an example of ways that you can use Serger stitches differently. So that's all Serger stitches. Doing like, so this is using like decorative pin tucks and almost like little ruffles that you can use your serger for. This is from something called Distinctive Serger Gifts and Crafts, an ideal book for all occasions by Naomi Baker and Tammy Young. These are, of course, out of print, but you can find them used online.
And sometimes you could find them in the Amazon store. So you should try to see if you can link it, Julian, too, because people will put, have those used books and they sell them. So, and the
Absolutely.
information is not, for the most part, it's not changing, especially the what is not changing. The how is going to be specific to your machine, but the what is information that we all can benefit from.
Yes. Another one. So this is from if you are if you are familiar with the Palmer Pletch era, so they did a lot of your paper fittings and stuff like that in the 80s and 90s. They had something called Creative Serger Illustrated. This is by Patty Palmer and a few of her other constituents. So giving you some other creative ways that you can use your serger, talking about different threads, using like you can see here even like almost what it looks like very simple yarns and stuff like that. That's another book. Lastly, you have something called Surge Art. So this is wearable art for the creative serger. So we never really like most of us never think of the ways that we can use our serger outside of the regular. But this is really some different ways that you can really utilize your machine and really have some fun with it. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And I wrote down these names of those books too, because again, we've paid a lot of money for these sergers. We should use them. And it gives us an opportunity to also give our sewing machine some break. We put a lot of,
Mine.
miles on these machines. And so it's best that we could try to, spread the love and give our sergers some love. And I hope that we'll be able to do that in April. So let's switch up a little bit and talk about some of the specific stitches. So, because again, this is about stitches, learning how and what and when we're going to use these different stitches. And so the first one, you kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, which is the rolled hem. You talked a little bit about that. Can you tell us, one, what is it? And when is it typically used? And I don't know if you have any samples in your arsenal of things, but if you do, if you can show us, like, what is it? If you have one, if you have a sample.
So I don't. I think I have my kit of samples upstairs, but a rolled hem I can tell you very easily. So a rolled hem basically the knife is still there, but when you're doing a serger stitch, if you actually look at your foot, let me see if I can show you. Give me a second here. I'm going to flip my camera for a moment. How can I flip it? Flip it. There we go. Save. All right. So we're gonna kind of turn my thing this way and bring this down.
Thank you. Oh yeah, that's awesome. Look at that.
All right. So when you are looking at your machine, normally on the side here, you have something that shows an O or an R. O stands for overlock, R stands for rolled hem. Now, because I want to make sure that you can see it. Now, and I've been using my machine, so it ain't gonna be clean. So y'all better not shame me, because I'll vacuum it out later. Um, so what you are doing here, let's see if you can see it. When you do this, there is a little finger. So there's that finger back there, right? That goes
Oh
out
yeah,
the
I
way.
see it.
Okay. So that finger helps to hold out the stitches so that it makes it kind of lays flatly around the edge of the fabric when you're done. Okay. So when you are doing a rolled hem, with that finger going away, it's going to tighten around the edge of your fabric and it's going to roll the edge of your fabric as well, creating a nice hem finish. You can also do them without the knife as well if you wanted to get that similar look. You can turn off your knife and do a rolled hem as well. A lot of times, you are going to do that on garments that like a regular hem is not going to work. So that could be like some of your laces, chiffons, um, tulle, or something like that. That's a lot of times where you're going to use a lot of your rolled hems.
Okay.
Um, it is so like a lot of like we in prom season and stuff like that. That's where rolled hems is really about to come into play.
Okay, no, that is definitely helpful. What I just kind of practicing the rolled hem, what I noticed is that the rolled hem gives a much tighter, it pulls it together tighter. And so that's actually, I try to do rolled hem all the time now that I know that there's a difference in how it look. Just like you said, by flipping that switch, one is a more flatter, the unrolled hem is more flatter stitch. The rolled
Yes.
hem is a more tighter, like it's not going anywhere. So
Now, but the other stitch will not go anywhere either. Um, but it's going to create a little. It's going to create more bulk when you're using having it in rolled hem. So it's going
yes.
to have a more bulky edge because you're rolling that fabric a little bit more. Um, if you're looking for something that is nice and flat and stuff like that, that's where I usually do that. Yes, you can use the attachment for rolling hems as well. There are usually different feet that you can add on to your serger for that. Um, Hell, there are. Let me see if I have the
Aren't
foot up.
there feet that go into the regular sewing machine as well that could give you that rolled hem? Or yeah,
There
because
are.
I remember seeing that. I think I actually have a foot that has that little. It's got
Yes.
a little
And it rolls the fabric
rolling
for you
thing.
as you're going through.
Yes.
Yes. Let me see. But I have some feet like there are so many different options and stuff. Watch your needle size with the rolled hem on 5 pound. Yes, it will perforate a rolled hem right on. Yes, it will. Depending, especially how fast you are using, how tight you're doing your fabrics on. But normally, um, if you are using a fine fabric, on like in your surgery, you do need to change your needles to match the size, the weight of fabric that you're using. A lot of times we keep the needles in that we came with the machine.
Right.
You do need to change your needles as well on
I
your
am weak.
serger.
I am weak. I am weak.
Look, if you are doing for most of your wovens as well as for your regular knits. A size 80 is all you need. And because of the way that a serger moves, the needles move faster. So these sergers go upwards of 1,500 stitches a minute. Most sergers on the market outside of the Bernina one goes around 1,300 stitches per minute. A regular sewing machine only goes between 800 to 1,100 stitches per minute.
Okay.
Semi-industrials go around 15 to 1,600 stitches per minute. Industrials go upwards of 5,000 stitches per minute.
Ooh.
The faster the machine goes, there's less wear on the needle because there's more punching power and it's going so fast. So the needles are not really dulling out super fast on your serger. So you do not need to change your serger needles like you change your sewing machine needles.
Okay.
Okay.
But you definitely need to make sure that, particularly if you're doing a rolled hem, that you look at what kind of fabric am I using and do I have the right needle? Because you don't want to put all that work in and then you have all these holes in your garment because the needle is not the right one.
Absolutely. But also too, you want to make sure that you are using the proper needles. So the needle system for your machine. So let me show you here. So
Okay.
with these Bernina sergers, there are needles that came with it.
Yes.
These are the ELX 705 CF. These are specifically for these L8 series sergers. Now, if you cannot buy the Bernina ones, the Bernina needles like these are actually branded by Schmetz. So Schmetz makes these for Bernina, but you are looking for this exact ELX 705 type needles for your machine.
705. Okay. And those are for the serger, the
For your serger and for your serger only. But
okay.
depending on the brand of machine or something like that, each brand some like they may not use home sewing machine needles. So you need to make sure that you're using the proper needles for your machine.
Okay, that is good. Okay, so I have another question.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the first time I kind of got introduced to even the term serger, because again, it was new to me, was around knits. Why is a
Absolutely.
serger more applicable to knits? And are there other types of fabrics that that serger should be used for? And are there fabrics that you just want to not use a serger for, like stay away? Is that such a thing?
So the reason that sergers are usually synonymous with knits is because a lot of times your serger stitches can stretch. So the way that they are formed, it is allows for a stretchier stitch. What we have found is that basically You have your 4 thread, your 3 thread, and your 2 thread. The least amount of threads in your serge stitch, the stretchier it is. So a 4 thread is going to be of a more of a stabilizing stitch. It's not going to have as much stretch. You will want to use that for some of your side seams. Let's say that you are using we have all used those knits that like to grow on us if we're wearing them. If you are using like a 4 thread seam on your side seams, that's going to help make sure that it does not stretch on out. So I don't understand how the ELX 700 can truly work for all fabrics. Yes, so it can work for all fabrics because of the speed of the machine, the speed of a serger. You don't really need to go from like to a knit needle or something like that in your serger. In your serger. Understand me. Do not think that I'm going to sew as fast as I can and my regular needle is going to go through a knit on my regular. Don't do that. But in your serger, it works and it's fine. Um, and that's just how these like that works for both knits as well as for woven fabrics. Um, Now back to your question about different fabrics and stuff like
Different
that.
fabrics. Okay.
So yes, it offers elastic. So that's why you see a lot of people use serger for knits.
So
Um,
before you go on to the other fabric, I just want to make sure you said the least number of threads gives you more stretch. The more threads, it's more like a stabilizer,
yes, it's
which means
stabilizing.
it has a little bit less stretch,
Has a
right?
little bit less stretch,
Okay.
but it still stretches with you. So
Okay.
like if you're using a 4 thread on a regular everything falling. Any hoodles. So this I use a regular 4 thread safety stitch. It still stretches, okay?
Okay.
Still stretches. But there are other, like in our sergers, if we're looking at it, let me show you here. I'm going to show you some of the stitches on the screen. Give me a second here. There we go. Save. All right. Okay. I'm going to use my stylus as well. Okay. So you have something called like a super stretch stitch. So this is using only 2 or 3 threads, and it's basically has less like amount holding it together in the looping.
Okay.
Okay. So instead of having like, so if you're looking at a 4 thread, and I'm put this in color so that you can see. So you have one thread you have the red threads making the loop. There then is a layer of blue that kind of loops the together. So you will see the under loopers and the like the upper loopers and the lower loopers. That's what's holding everything together tightly. Okay. Now on this one, the 3 thread, there is only one color of looper. So it's only using, I think it's your upper looper. Yeah.
Okay.
It's only using your no, it's only using your lower looper, not your upper looper. And with your lower looper, it is going from the back side to the front side, and that's what's creating more stretch. Okay.
Got it.
So and then you just have the other 2 needles. Now let's go down to one of our 2 threads stitches. So here is a wrapped overlock. So literally, instead of having a layer of stitches right there in the needle, so normally on a 3 thread, you would have your looper going all the way to the other side. You'll have one layer of stitches and then another one right on top, like that looks like a regular straight stitch. This only has one at the bottom. A lot of times you will use like your 2 thread stitches as it's a beautiful hemming finish. I don't use it for construction. Um, Unless you really are wanting it to like you might do this for like I've done this with decorative threads on blankets and stuff like that. That's normally where I use that stitch for.
Okay. No, that makes perfect sense. The way you described it and those examples make a lot of sense in terms of the options and when we might want to use something that gives us more stretch versus something that is more stable, even though all of them give us some stretch.
So Kingdom Daughter, so most machines are capable of a 3 thread stitch. Now some machines only have 3 threads. It all depends. So I know Juki sells a machine in their like 650 line or something like that that is only a 3 thread machine. But so a 3 thread overlock, a 3 thread overlock wide, or a 3 thread overlock narrow is a fine construction stitch. Before I had this machine here, I had a Juki serger that only did 3 threads. But most machines, if it does a 4 thread, it should be able to do a 4, a 3, and a 2 thread. Only and basically the only change you're making to get from a like for some machines to get from a 4 thread to a 3 thread, like you're basically just taking out either sometimes it's the looper, other times it could be one of the needles that you are unthreading. So you might be unthreading like your leftmost needle or your rightmost needle. Just all depends.
So can you talk a little bit about, that was great. That was a good question in terms of, again, if you have the 4 thread, you can go down. You can switch
Yes.
down to the lower, the 3 thread by removing a needle or changing the way that it uses the loopers. So can you talk a little bit about the other types of fabrics? So we talked about the knit fabric. Can we talk a little bit about the other fabrics that a serger can be used for? And are there any fabrics that we should really stay away from in terms of using the serger on that you're aware of?
So you can use this on basically on your knit fabric. So I like ITYs, your double brush polys and everything like that, your jerseys. You can also use it on your regular knits. I use it in the making of jeans and denim. I've used it in the making of like shirts, like a lot of my button up shirts and stuff like that, the edges and the insides are finished on my serger. I got to the point where I basically started putting together using a 4 thread safety stitch the whole entire shirt on the serger. So like all of my body seams. Hold on, let me show you. Give me a second here. There we go. Do do do. Turn. There we go. A lot of like the way that I put in sleeves now is I some people will flat fill them and stuff like that. I basically put my sleeves in, I serge them. I do this on both knits and wovens. Um, and you can do construction with this. The only time I really would not use a serger on a fabric, it's like some of your vinyls and some of your leathers, just because it's going to create so many holes. And if you mess it up, stuff like that, and if you're not using right needles, it can gum it up and stuff like that. There are a lot of times there are not a lot of Teflon foots for a serger, so it can cause more issues.
No, that's a great point. Again, I think a good reason just again to have some awareness as we're getting into using our sergers more. When should we stay away from it? And that's the worst thing, to have a, some leather and all of a sudden you're like, I made a mistake and you got all these holes in it. It's like, do I get a whole nother piece of expensive leather, or do I just have a wholly
Yes. Also, so sequins, especially
sequence?
certain sequins, yes, because again, so with certain like a lot of people will use pins with when they're sewing and will sew over pins. You can't do that on a serger. You cannot sew over a pin with a serger. Okay. You need to make sure that it will mess up your knife and stuff like that if you sew over something metal or a pin or something like that. Same with sequins. Now, depends on the sequence that you're using. I have seen people do it as a finishing, like let's say that you just have on those dot sequins that are glued on. Yeah, you can maybe do a little bit of that. But unless like if you are using your serger for sequence, you would basically need to remove all the sequence from the seam allowance to be able to do that.
I was just about to ask you about
Yeah.
that. That's what I've heard, that you should be removing that sequence when you're sewing in general,
Yes,
and then
you
serging.
should be removing all of the sequence from the seam allowance if you're going to do that. So and it's same with burlap. So burlap, because that is a heavy weight thread, but usually a looser weave, it can create a mess because it could just be a lot of stuff like that um in your serger.
So what I think for the most part, I'm hearing a no for different reasons, but for vinyl leather sequence, unless you're going to remove the sequence, or you have that sequence that's kind of not the sewed in sequence, but the more glued on the top sequence, those smaller little bitty ones. And
And you have
burlap.
to be aware that in doing that, that glue and your needle, like you're probably gonna have to change needles after projects like that. And it would almost be something to test. But if you are worried about it, no, no, don't do it. Don't do it.
Right.
That's
Because
what I say.
the machine
Like
costs
I can
more than your
be
fabric most of the time. So we got
exactly
to protect our machine.
yes.
Um, But so other than those few,
Mhm.
which we've used rarely, we're not making stuff regularly unless you're making, unless you're a purse bag woman or man, you're probably using a lot more leather and vinyl. Or prom season is coming up, so we know there's a lot more sequins used during that time. But other than that, we could pretty much use a serger on our other fabrics that you mentioned. Shirting is interesting that you pretty much are using that completely. So I'm going to keep that in mind. Okay, so a couple of other questions, and this is really great, very helpful. Hopefully, everybody is learning from a lot of the things that you're sharing with us, Julian. I think you talked a little bit already about chain basting. I really wasn't sure. You talked about chain stitch. I really wasn't sure what chain basting was. I saw that on the list of things that you can do with the overlocking locker machine or a serger machine, and so I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about chain basting. Like, what is that? When would you use it? Um,
All right, so let's go back to the machine. I will show you. Okay. So I'm going to go all the way back up to my 4 thread overlock safety stitch. Now, again, what's great about these machines, and because I always like to tell people about this, you can do these machines in expert or guided mode. So normally I have my machine in expert mode, so I can go automatically to the stitch. But let's say that I was new to this and not true to this. We can hit this button and we can literally, it teaches me each and every time how to thread my machine. Now, let's say that there are pieces that I did not fully understand, such as how do I adjust the pressure foot pressure? I can push this button right here and it shows me videos. So this is one of the great things about the L860 and the L890 sergers is that it really is super beginner friendly, and it takes away a lot of the guesswork so that you can be more adventurous and bold with with your serger. Because a lot of times we get our machines, we thread it once, we don't thread it no more, and we will use the same color for everything. You could be making a white ball gown and using black thread on the inside to serge it because you are scared to unthread your serger. So these are one of the reasons that I like this machine. And a lot of the manual literally is built into your machine, and it even goes through how to thread each of like your loopers and stuff like that with beautiful in color um, diagrams and little videos and automations. So I always want to show that a little bit so that people can get a sense for that. Okay, so now we're at our 4th thread. All right. So as you were talking about what is chain, now remember earlier when I chained off or created that like that looping, so this little piece back here, that is a chain. So if you are doing some type of, let's say that you are doing quilting, that's normally where chain piecing is coming into play. So we're going to put this under my machine here. Um, and what I do know for my machine, from this, which is our left needle, so there's a little marking here, this is our left needle. To the edge of this foot is 1/4 inch. So I'm going to cut off a little bit of 1/4 inch of the fabric, okay? So we're going to start here. And I'm slowing down the machine just a little bit so that you can see it. So now we're getting towards the edge of our fabric and we are wanting to do some chaining. So I'm going to fold another little piece here. We are going to chain that off. And then we're going to go into the next piece.
oh,
Okay. And this becomes your chain basting. Okay. So especially if you're trying to do quilting and stuff like that, at 1/4 inch, you're doing a lot of half square triangles. This is what you would mean by like chain basting or anything like that. And what you can then do is if you are needing a larger stitch, like your stitch length and stuff like that, you can go, oh no, I didn't want to go there. So you can go right here and we can make the stitch wider or looser. And what's great is, of course, there's a video if you need to see how it's going to look. So I can increase my stitch width to see all of the different ways that we can do this. Like
wow.
so
Okay,
I can
so
use a larger stitch or a shorter stitch, and that's my chain basting.
okay, and so what if from what I think I heard you say and my understanding, this is something you would do if you were doing like quilting, and I've seen like
Mm-hmm.
somebody put the blocks together, the squares together in that way, this is a way that you could do that.
Correct. Correct. So
Is
this is
there
how
any?
a lot of people will utilize their serger in quilting is by it's a speedier way to do a lot of your piecing.
And you mentioned something else that I thought was really helpful, and I see Cast Downs has a question, so I'm going to come back to your question in a minute. But you just showed us, and I think everybody probably has this on their serger, what those lines, and I never knew what those lines meant on your foot
Yes.
of your machine, what those lines represent. Can you talk a little bit about, and I know it's going to be different for everyone, but I know on my brother machine, I had those lines too. And
Yes.
I didn't really know what they meant. Never knew what they meant.
So yeah, these lines, let me here we go. We'll use a pen. Trying to make sure I ain't have nothing sharp so I can show you. So yes, these lines here usually are imitating with, like, they line up with the lines of your needles. So just to kind of show you here. So this one is your left needle. This one is your right needle. So this is where your cutting edge starts. So you need to have the fabric past this if you want it to be able to get cut. Now, you can change the cutting width on your machine. So if we're looking at our machine here, there is a little knob down here that changes our cutting width. So by doing this, you can literally make it go in further or push it out to get a wider stitch. Okay, so it will be cutting less. So basically, if I am at my normal 6, that is from here to the edge of this, that's going to be a 1/4 inch. Okay, so that's my 1/4 inch stitch for a lot of your knit garments. So now let's say that I'm wanting to cut off more. So basically, from here, I would need to cut more to get it to that knife. It would need to cut about over here, and there will be just more fabric, and we'll have a wider stitch. So just to kind of show you. So this is our normal width of stitch at a 6. Okay. And now I'm
Mm-hmm.
about to show you at a wider stitch here. Okay. And that is at a 9. So not too many machines on the market can go up to a 9 mm stitch width from a 6. Most of them stop at like a 7 or an 8. But this is the largest on the market.
And while you have your machine, your camera pointed down there, can you also, I mean, I think you talked about this already a little bit, but if you can specifically point out to us, one of the things that I have always been confused when I had my brother, and I still didn't have a clear understanding until you just mentioned it a minute ago, how much seam allowance I was cutting off, trying to stay within my 1/4 or, whatever the 5/8, whatever it is that you were trying to stay within and not cut
Mm-hmm.
too much. I just always kind of eyeballed it and said, okay, this is where I'm going to put it at. But there's markers on that tell you how much you're cutting off, where your knife is. How can you look at your machine, or where would somebody look to kind of help them understand how much they are cutting off of their seam allowance?
So of course, every machine is different. So some of the brother machines, they do have markings over here that
Yes.
show you, and so that for that seam allowance. Now with this machine, it comes with a clip-on seam gauge, okay, or seam guide. So basically, by clipping this on, that's allowing me to know how far I am doing it. So, and by measuring, I now know. So if I have my stitch width set to a 6, I know from here to the edge of my foot here, that is a 1/4 inch. Now, or actually, no, from here to here is a 1/4 inch. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
From here to here. So basically to the knife. So if we just want to get a dusting, that's all we cut. Now, from my left needle to the edge of the foot, that's 3/8 of an inch.
Okay.
Okay. And I basically line up my seam gauge to that so I can get a 3/8 of an inch. Now, if I go from my left needle all the way to the edge of the plate, so the edge of this plate right here, of this metal plate, that's going to be 5/8 of an inch. And of course, what I always do, of course, I like to keep a seam gauge near my machine just in case. But I've used this machine enough. I know that that is how it operates. Now, if and then of course, if I change from this and go out with a wider stitch width, I then need to recalibrate where everything is going. But note, my left needle does not move; just my cutting width moves. So if I still want it to be 5/8 of an inch, it will still be 5/8 of an inch at the edge of this foot,
Okay.
at the edge of the plate.
So for those that are joining, again, if those markers on, and I'm sure that in my brother, when I had my brother, I'm sure that it probably told me. I never really looked for it, but that, obviously understanding where your seam allowance and how much you're cutting off can make a difference in how your garment is going to fit. And so you're right. On the brother, it was on the facing your machine on that right side. There was little markings on that piece that was on the other side of your, like where you had pointed to, it was on the other side. So just taking a look at that and understanding where they are, you can definitely find that in your manual. So I just wanted to go over that because you mentioned it a little bit, and I think that that was an important piece of information for me to know as well.
And in
um
the comments, I want to thank everybody in the comments for stopping away. We're about to sew some sequins. Praise the Lord. Y'all doing the Lord's work today, and we thank you.
Yes, I ditto that. I ditto that. Okay, so again, moving into a couple of our last couple of questions. So ruffles and gathering,
Mhm.
not something that I'm familiar with by any means, and had no idea that that was something that could be done on the serger. And so, can you talk a little bit about ruffles and gathering being done on a serger, like?
So yes, so on a serger, of course, there are feet that can help with like ruffles and gathers and stuff like that. But one of the biggest ways that you are going to do that is by utilizing your differential feed. So this is your on our machine, and most machines, it will have a diagram of something looking like an accordion fold or something that looks almost like a bow tie. So if we touch on that, that's going to take us to this screen here. And sorry for the light. Let me see. There we go. And that ain't helped nothing. My bad. So, but this is kind of changing a lot of our differential feed screens. So, what we're gonna do here is we're gonna look at this, just so that you can see kind of what the changes in the differential feed can look like. Okay. So when you have lowered your differential feed, you can see that it's giving you like a ruffled effect. Now, if we turn it up a little bit further, like to a 1, that's going to give you more of a straight feed. So it's going to feed the same on both sides to keep the fabric straight. And if you want to turn it all the way up, that's going to almost kind of give it a stretched out effect. And it's going to give a different type of ruffle. Okay.
So if you did that on a stretchy fabric, when you take it off of there, it's going to gather it kind of.
Uh huh. So it's going to give you like that gathered effect the more you turn it up.
So when you say lower, can you tell, you said lower it, the first one you demonstrate, you used the term lower to give it more of like a ruffle. What does lower
No,
mean?
I messed it. I think I messed it up. So basically,
Okay.
by lowering it down, that is means that it's going to one side is going to feed less than the other side, and it's
Okay.
going to stretch it. Now, but if
Okay.
you turn it all the way up to like a 2 in your differential feed, such as that, it's going to feed the top at a faster rate than the bottom, and that's what's going to give you like that lettuce hem. That lettuce hem can be using your ruffles. Now, also too with this, of course, you can do like there's ways to do other gathers. In men's garments, I don't do it often, but there are ways to do it. A lot of times, one of the first things, even before you get to some of your ruffles and stuff like that, you're going to use, a lot of times you're going to use your lettuce hem first, or your lettuce hem is a way that you can really have fun and providing like a simple decorative treatment, and this is something that you can do on any fabric if you have differential feed on your machine. Some machines do not have differential feed. So like your if it was just like a regular 1034, not the D usually stands for differential feed. If it does not have the D, it will not have this feature. But there are other ways, like just by like the way you're holding your fabric and stuff like that, that's gonna give you different ways that you can kind of manipulate if you're going to get ruffles or not. So let me. And this is a stable knit, so it's going to be a little bit harder here, but we should be able to see a little something. And I got this set up. Oh, I got this set up all wrong. But this will give us at least a little something. So just by using that, we're seeing that we're starting to get a little bit of that. But now let's say we are using a finer fabric, such as a chiffon. That's normally where we are really going to be able to see a lot of your different lettuce hems and stuff like that. There are, of course, also feet that can help in gathering. And depending on how you have your machine set up, you can also gather just by changing some of the settings on your machine. So either by tightening up your needles. So usually you're tightening up like your lower needle or something like that with the tension. You can gather it up some more, or tightening up one of your loopers. I want to say it's your upper looper. Don't quote me on that. I One of the ways that you can do this. So for each of these machines, if you go to YouTube, there's something called Serger School. So I did a season of it, as well as Jamie, who is also with Bernina, who is the actual Overlocker Serger expert for America, like the educator. She has done some as well, and she will be able to really educate on how you can use some of those other features, and even some of the new feet that are coming out. So one of the new feet that are coming out for the Bernina Serger is a curved foot, so that you can sew around curves easier. Or if you're trying to sew around a circle and do some serging around the circle, if you're using this normal foot, sometimes it could be a little bit difficult. So there's now a new foot that's coming out that is not only clear but also thinner, so that it can make a perfect circle around different edges.
Now that is really, really helpful. So the Serger School on YouTube is
Yes.
something that we could all benefit from to learn more about the serger. I challenge everyone to really look at your manuals, especially if you have a serger. And I think most of the time I hear people talk about they have the 1034D. I think or the DX. I think those are the ones that I think I've heard people talk about. So, we do a lot of gathering. There's been a lot of Nomi patterns that come out that have gathering and ruffles, and we all love those things. But we, again, the effort of trying to put those in, we have these sergers. Let's figure out how we can use those sergers to create those ruffles. And so those were the questions that I had for you, Julian. And again, one of the reasons why I was really vested in bringing you here to tell us a lot about the serger is, one, because again, next month we're going to be doing a lot of patterns that are these stretchier materials that you are more likely to use a serger with, more knits and more athleisure types of patterns. And so I thought it would be really great for us to become more familiar about how we can use our serger, because that increases the speed at which we're able to get through and finish these these patterns. So if you plan on sewing along with us in April on our Get Social sew alongs, the things that Julian just walked us through will help us in our efforts. I do plan on using my serger a lot to make these some of these patterns where I'm able to. So this information that you're giving us is really, really helpful. I'm gonna, close out soon, but I just want to see, Julian, do you have any other kind of last minute things that you would like to say to us about the serger, anything we need to know? And for those that have joined, any last minute questions that you might have for Julian about the serger?
So one thing I definitely wanted to make mention is that one stitch that we have not talked about that can be really vital in this work that you're about to do with your knit garments is and making athletic wear, is something called a flatlock. Okay. So flatlock, that's what's going to give you that looks like the bottom part of a cover stitch on the back. So let me show you that real fast. So I've already I Ooh, I just set my machine for a flat lock wide. Do this. There we go. All right. So I set my machine for a flat lock wide here. And basically, I'm not removing my needle, but I just took the thread out of it. So it's
Okay.
unthreaded. Okay. So I'm going to take my piece of fabric and I'm just going to sew this at about a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance just so that we can get this out. Okay. And we're going to sew that like regular. All right. So from here, it looks like a regular stitch. Okay. But
Yes.
when I open it up, so that's going to give you a different type of look that you can have that combines your fabric. So the fabric is connected and it's not falling apart, but it gives you a nice decorative edge. So if you are using like variegated threads or wanting to like use a contrasting thread or something like that in your machine, especially like on the side of your leggings or something like that, where you also want to have full utilization of that stretch, a flat lock stitch is a great stitch to use. Now for machines that do not have like the screen and stuff, the biggest things that you are changing on your machines is you are going to turn down the tension on your needle and you're going to turn up the tension on your lower looper.
Turn down tension
On your needles and turn up the tension on your lower looper. And that can give you a flat lock stitch. And again, so and this is a flat lock wide, but you also can do a flat lock narrow stitch.
And you know what's so interesting? So Aisha, you see you're on. I did that stitch. I had no idea what it was. I was making something and I just happened to look at it. I was like, what is this stitch showing through on? I did it on a skirt. And it was showing through on the other side. Luckily it was a stitch that matched the,
Yeah.
the fabric. And I was
Mhm.
like, I couldn't figure it out what I was doing. This was probably one of my first time using my serger. And I just wore it out and people were like, oh, that looks so nice. Like they thought it was part of the design. And I'm
Right.
thinking my serger is broken. I don't know what I'm doing with it. But the stitch was intentional. Aisha, you
Yeah.
remember I was trying to figure out like, what am I doing? And I actually I ended up removing it because I didn't really know what it was. Even though I got compliments on it, it wasn't what I had wanted.
Had
I
in mind.
wanted a regular serger stitch.
Right.
It just so happened that it worked. It happened that it worked, but so I didn't know that was actually a thing.
So and again, and this is so what's great about this is you can use it either this direction or this one. So like with this side, let's
Yes,
say
that was
that
the outside.
if I wanted to weave through some ribbon or something through this, like there are so many decorative options that you can just do with simple things like that using that flat lock. So playing with the tensions on your machine can really give you some different results that are still very strong and stretchy. So
That is awesome. I'm going to use that. I'm actually going to use that. Now that I know it's a real thing and it's not just my machine not being calibrated correctly, I'm going to use that.
I made
Any
whole
questions?
t-shirts and like deck and designed fabric using flat lock stitches and just having fun with it.
Yes, that is awesome. Okay, I'm just scrolling through to make sure we don't have any. Thank you, Lisa. I agree. This was so informative. I've learned a lot.